One of the things which I was doing this morning, I was thinking about a collage of environmental issues that's just happening around us at the moment. I mean, we've had the fires, we have drought, we have in this morning's paper Sydney might run out of water, we have politicians saying is it the right time to talk about politics and climate change, and we're coming towards that season of the year where we face the prospect of excessive heat. There are so many things happening in the whole territory of climate change, it becomes like a multiplier of problems, and sometimes can leave people not quite knowing what to do. There's a technical term, it's called psychic numbing. I'm wondering if people who have not been part and parcel of a movement up to date, where do they begin to start? Because there are so many things going on around us.
Sure. Well, there are a lot of places to start. I mean, working on your own lifestyle is a natural place to start. That using public transport, eating less red meat, eating less meat generally, composting. These all avoid methane emissions. Yeah, and that gives a sense of personal agency. And also, when you do speak out on environmental questions, there's a certain integrity about it. There are a lot of organisations that have thought through how to respond to. So it's good to join others. You know, trying to take action on your own, even something as merit-worthy of writing to your local member, which is great. If you're on your own, it's much harder to face this. People find this is what's been so energising about the student climate strike. People working together has people feeling, you know, you just draw hope from it. And I found before I got involved in climate change, I thought, oh, I can't get involved in climate change. I'd be thinking about it all the time, and I'd feel even more anxious than I feel now. It's gone the other way. The more active I am, the less I'm actually worrying and just generally anxious. I'm actually, you know, feeling energised and connected with other people. Okay, maybe technically I don't feel hopeful, but it's helping me get through the day.
I would say start with three things we can immediately do. The first thing, in my mind, everything has to have a rationale and a reason and a meaning. Now, one of the key things that we should all know as human beings is that we give nothing to the environment in a physical sense. We only take away from it. I think just realizing that is a big thing. Because we may think, oh, we're building these buildings, we're creating a civilization. That doesn't give anything to the environment. We're actually taking from the environment to do those things. We're out of the ecosystem, in a way. So I think this is very important. So the second thing flows from that, which is, well, how can I reduce my consumerism habits? Consumerism, spending by 50%. I reckon we can all reduce our spending by 50%. And that has a major impact or benefit. We don't need to buy, like if you're buying 10 clothes a year, buy 5 pieces of clothes. If you buy 4 shoes, buy 2. Isn't it? Like, because to manufacture all of those, you take away raw materials from the environment, and you need factories, energy, all of that, using water, all of those things come with that. The third one is that we're either leading our organization or we are part of an organization. That's like a workplace. So we need to raise this issue in our workplaces to make it more eco-friendly. And we have a voice, basically. Like just as an example, in Isra, we've done we wanted paperless, operation. And also, we're turning off our air conditioning early, 1 hour early every day. If it has to go off at 6 p.m., we're turning it off. I think we're turning it off at 4 p.m. Again, that's a reduction of the energy expense of that place by 15%. So all these little steps, I think, go a long way, Clive.
I want to pick up on a matter of language. We spent some time trying to think through what would be an appropriate theme for this series, and what we came up was a reference to hope. But our use of hope coincides with the emergence of Extinction Rebellion. Numerous cities and countries now talk about climate emergency. Even Britain, in the midst of Brexit, has got both parties talking about climate emergency. And last week, I was giving a presentation, I was called apocalyptic. How do we manage these kind of terms? Because sometimes they seem to close responses down, make people angry, what have you. How does one persist in trying to proclaim a message of hope in the midst of a discourse which often seems to panic it out of existence?
Okay, in one way, hope is useless. In one way, if understood as a feeling that things are going to be okay, because it's not accurate, it's not honest. It's very uncertain how things are going to go. So the kind of hope we need is the kind of hope that gets us up in the morning and looking at this square in the eye and doing something about it. That is hope in an active sense, kind of being responsible, being responsive. I do think we need to keep using the term emergency because that's the reality we're in. You know, you young people, you don't want us to sort of be sugarcoating and saying, oh no, things will be, you know, when they're not, because you're going to get a shock sometime, you know, and it's going to be really disappointing. So, and the same goes for all of us, you know, we need to know what we're dealing with, but we can't just kind of be using term emergency and getting panicked. And, you know, I think always we need to have that dimension of what people can do. I remember 6 years ago, the environment movement was very scared to be telling people that, you know, how bad things are, because we were told that fear doesn't actually motivate people. Well, actually, the research shows that it does. And when Bill McKibben came out, he called a spade a spade. You know, he said, we're in serious trouble here, but he gave a pathway to act. And actually, the pathway to act is just, I mean, we can, you know, maybe we only need a bit of all the factual stuff, and the pathway to act should really be more 80-90% of what we talk about.
Now, three things really generate and keep hope. The first one is action. The moment we take action, you become hopeful or part of that hope. And the second thing is that we need to say to ourselves, we need to pick a side, you know, and make clear which side we're on. So if there are two sides, let's say one doesn't care and that what we do with the environment, denying the problem, we can pick a side and say, no, I'm going to do something about it. And I pick the side of activism and supporting the environmental activism. Then the moment we pick that side, we become committed to it, regardless of what happens. So I think those three things makes a person hopeful. I mean, we went through that as Muslims, you know, after 9/11. You know, how do you keep your hope alive when there's a barrage of negativity? And this is exactly what we did. And I think we can apply that to environmental activism as well.
One of the reasons why I asked that question about hope and its relationship to climate extinction and what have you, was because on previous affinity occasions we've had people like Bob Carr, who came in last year, and he painted a dystopia of a Sydney in great trouble as part of his autobiography, and it was designed to get conversation going. And we've also had Will Steffen, who came in as an Earth system scientist, and he presented us with the trajectory of hothouse Earth. And so there's an awkward conversation to be held between hope and that kind of scenario. Now, I'd like to follow that through personally, but we haven't got time for that. But I want to ask another couple of questions before I throw it open. And the first is really directed at you, Mehmet, because this is this wonderful Islamic declaration on global climate change. I think it out Pope Francis because it mentioned changing Earth systems and had a lot of action attached to it. It was a wonderful document. But I suspect it's not very well known amongst Australian Muslims. And I also think that, as you said, many people become concerned about other matters, especially with Islamophobia and identity questions, so that this ends up sort of down the pecking order a bit. I wonder how one converts the conversation about ethics into practice within Muslim communities.
One idea that I came up with at last week's climate change conference was that maybe perhaps use Ramadan, because Ramadan is a month of being thankful for what God has provided, and we're not supposed to waste things. So perhaps declare 1 week in Ramadan or somewhere in the year as an Islamic environmental week. And then spread this out to schools, mosques, and even prepare more sermons and send it to imams prepared, because imams like prepared sermons, because they have to do it every week. If someone gives them a prepared one, I say, oh yeah, that's good. Okay. And I'm planning to write one, and if we can achieve that in every mosque, 1 week of the year, we talk about environment, I think it will go a long way. So that's one of the projects that we have in mind, hopefully.
Now, knowing Mehmet as I do, I know that's not going to happen.
Why? Why do you say that?
Oh, you're very good at having ideas that are then converted into action.
Okay.
Thea, before I ask other people for their questions, I have one for you too, and that has to do with ARC. And in what ways can the Muslim communities assist, participate, be more involved in the life of a body like ARC? I was conscious when you spoke about the 11 people being arrested, and I thought, well, that could be quite awkward for the Muslim community, so that there have got to be other lines of involvement, I think. So how would you respond? How can Muslim communities be more involved?
I think it's really tough on Aboriginal Australians and Muslims who, are in a minority and suffering other forms of discrimination to be, that we're not calling on them to do that. But I just think where religion has gone, people have developed some jaundiced views of religion in the last decade or two, especially with the clergy sexual abuse crisis, that when we speak together, we still have a strong moral voice. As Christians on our own, if we tried to speak, it would be easily dismissed. But ARC has a bit of, because the majority of our members are Christian, and we do try and outreach to other communities like the Hindu community. They're ethnically different from us, so they tend not to be as attracted to us, and yet that diminishes our power. I suppose by people working together and in our full diversity, we're actually stronger. So it does actually help ARC when Muslims come on board, and I know I'm really grateful for the ISRA and the Australian Council of Imams beginning to take a strong interest here.
I really have plenty of other questions I'd like to ask, but I'm going to put a silencer on myself. Would anyone in the audience like to pose a question or two? I've got one over here, and then one at the back. John, we'll start off.
Yes, I too want to take up the question of language. We're tending to use in Australian politics the word conservative in a way which may in this debate not be helpful. I mean, because we are talking about conservative politics being split into two groups, social conservatives and economic libertarians. And I think the economic libertarians are the people who climate change activists have to be concerned about. So many social conservatives are waiting to be brought aboard on the climate change bandwagon. In fact, many of the things they have to say. So do we have a problem ourselves in the way climate activists and the activist movement is being careless and playing into the hands of the economic libertarians by the very form of the language and the discourse?
I personally think there's a lot of suspicion about this whole climate change thing within the conservative segment. They think it's not true, and it's just a political game by far left, to impose their own agenda onto the world. So that's the basis of their denial. So I think we need to understand the narrative of the conservative and put the climate change in that narrative somewhere. That's not being done, and therefore it's very easily dismissed by them.
And that phenomenon is because of Murdoch-influenced media and conservative elements that are really wanting to, demonise or just label certain voices in society. So it's not just because of the environment movement that's happening, but at the same time, the environment movement understands that that's the context we're in. And since the election, which for us was disastrous, we've been sort of looking at what is our messaging, and ARC and other groups are thinking we have to somehow reach through to the social conservatives to, appeal to different values, to address the economic concerns, the concerns about jobs. We just have to be very proactive about it.
John Williams at the back.
I would estimate that amongst my broader Christian community, that a majority do not believe that humans can influence climate change. And the Christian that is publicly known for that belief is Tony Abbott, who has publicly said that to believe humanity can impact climate change is paganism. And you also see it amongst conservative Christian politicians. There is a strong, very strong at times, it astounds me when I talk to some of my conservative Christian friends, that for me to be active in trying to do something about influence in climate change, that I'm actually anti-Christian. And it's very widespread. Pardon?
Have you got a specific question?
Yeah, the specific question is that the Christian church predominantly is working against the movement to impact and act on climate change.
I think I'm not a Christian, but it would come from the evangelical side, the American-based. There's a lot of YouTube channels out there that right-wing extremists, or some of them are religious. They're taking this issue as a main way of activism, and sometimes to stay relevant. Just like there's a media, circulation and all that on YouTube, it's the number of watches and likes. So people YouTube influencers tend to become extremists themselves. So I think that is influencing a lot of those things.
Okay. The National Christian Life Survey would not bear out that it's a majority who disagree that climate change is real and human-induced. I think it's very much within certain circles, like you say, the evangelical, perhaps Pentecostal circles, but there's still, I think Christian communities tend to reflect pretty much a spread similar to that in the broader society. So anyway, firstly, I wanted to kind of question that. Secondly, I guess ARC is much more interested, and I think activists do well to be less interested in the people who are going to, take your head on and completely disagree with you, and do better to try and bring in the people who are worried, who believe in climate change, and this is more a majority, I think, including in churches. Certainly in my parish, I'm in a Catholic parish, whenever I talk to anyone, I'm sure, actually there was a guy who thought I was a communist lunatic, but most of the people in the parish are fairly much on board, so I don't know. But anyway, to talk to and create opportunities for people to get active, because I think that's more common is, yeah, I'm worried, but I don't know what the heck to do.
If I may just add very quickly, this is why I'm focusing on Islamic ethics aspect of it, because I don't want this environmental protection issue something else that comes from into the Muslim world or Muslim thinking. It has to be generated from within.
Right. I mean, I would have loved to have answered that question, but I'm not going to, because we've only got time for one last question, and there's one here, and there's one over here too. So we'll do a faked one. So you can go first. Please make the question short.
Brother Mohammed, you talked about our carbon footprint, sorry. Now, as our individual responsibility regarding population control and eating of meat, do you think, you know that Muslims tend to have large families and they love to eat meat. Do you, do you think there will be a sort of resistance from the Muslim as individuals or from theologians regarding propagating that idea to reduce this footprint?
I think when we're talking to Muslims, we shouldn't start from the meat. They love the kebabs, you know. And I think there's a lot of things we can suggest. Once there's that commitment that I talked about, then you can mention the meat, and because I think you'll have a reaction to it, definitely.
Don't start in the deep end.
We have one last question from over here.
Hi, so my name is Ara and I'm from Affinity College, and you guys mentioned your high concerns regarding politicians and their failure to recognize the climate issues that's going on. But if it's so hard for adults to tackle on this issue, how are we as the younger generations and young adults able to, you know, tackle it even more?
Yeah, it is a tough one, but you've got a movement already happening, you know, the climate strikers, and if you begin associating with those young people, they are amazing. You know, there's, you know, in a way, we need to claim power. You know, we didn't shed slavery because it was an easy thing to do and it was just the next step or anything. People had to fight for it. And people had to fight, you know, for civil liberties in the southern states. And they had to, Gandhi and his mates in India had to fight for independence, even though it was logical and necessary. You know, and this is just another one thing we have to fight for, you know, our future. I mean, what choice have you got? It's hard. You know, it's going to be hard work, and we need to put ourselves on the line and take risks. You know, maybe raise it in conversations, even though it might be a taboo subject. You know, find ways of communicating about it. I just think we need to, you know, take up the challenge and know it's going to be difficult.
Just, I would add that I think you have a responsibility to remind elder people, those who are in positions of power, about your future. That's something that I think older people forget. Like when I was going to school and university, I used to worry about what's going to happen to the world. It was then nuclear holocaust possibly. And I said, oh my God, I might live 50 years. No, the earth could be destroyed in 50 years. But when you're 50, 60 years old, that kind of concern goes away. But what Greta has achieved is really reminded these adults, all the adults, that you have to think about the generations that are coming, that we have a responsibility to live a world worth living in.
we could have many, many more questions, and in a sense we've just been skimming over the surface of what is a very important matter. It's been called a super wicked problem. I want to thank both Mehmet and Thea for participating today, and I would like now to call on, and I haven't got the names here in front of me, to present a small gift of appreciation to Mehmet and to Thea on behalf of Affinity.